the Keenan Institute for Ethics at Duke, the Institute for Public Knowledge at NYU, and the Center on Modernity and Transition are proud to partner with ACSF to help amplify its vision through the speaker series on spirituality in contemporary architecture. Now, I want to introduce our guest presenter. Nader Ardalan is an architect and president of Ardalan Associates in Naples, Florida. He has had a long and distinguished international career in the fields of planning, architecture, and historic preservation, with a particular concern for the cultural and ecological aspects of architecture. He has a Bachelor's of Architecture degree from Carnegie Mellon University and a Master's of Architecture from Harvard. And he has previously held positions at Harvard, MIT, Yale, and Tehran University. He is the co-author with Alali Bakhtiar of the book, The Sense of Unity, the Sufi Tradition in Persian Architecture. And he has designed and overseen myriad master planning, hospitality, commercial, interior design, and residential projects, mainly in the US and in several Arab countries. He is a fellow of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard. He's a registered architect planner with the World Bank and UNESCO, and he serves on the board of directors for the International Forum for Architecture, Culture, and Spirituality. Today, he will be presenting the Shams-i-Tabrizi Mausoleum in Khoy, Iran, which he has been designing since 2012 on a pro bono basis, and the construction of which began in 2019, but was placed on hold after a year due to funding. So please welcome Nader Ardalan. Nader.
Thank you very much, Tom. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. It's my great pleasure to speak with you about a design for Ishq, for love, a memorial mausoleum for the 13th century mystic Shams-iTabrizi in Khoy, Iran. Here's a quick description of my planned 25-minute presentation. I will read for about 15 minutes about the background to the project. I will follow this by a short PowerPoint presentation and then turn it over to Tom, who will then moderate the rest of the event, and I will answer any questions. Thanks a lot. So this is a presentation that is about the Shams-i-Tabrizi Mausoleum. I want to give a brief introduction. Rumi is one of the most respected and popular mystical love poets of Iranian culture. And in the 21st century, he has also become America's most well-known metaphysical love poet. But who transformed this pious 13th century scholar into this transcendent mystical lover? It was his soul friend, Shams-i-Tabrizi, who was indeed Rumi's son, that illuminated him the evocative and deeply spiritual dimension of transcendent love of the Absolute. When the international design competition for the Mausoleum of Shams held in Iran in 2011 failed to find a suitable solution for this project, I, sitting away in faraway America, thought it a great shame if this historic figure might not be architecturally memorialized properly in his own birthplace of Iran. Therefore, I was genuinely motivated to personally donate on 12/12/12 to the Rumi and Shams Foundation in Iran a set of 7 hand-drawn ink drawings that I sensed might be valid and worthy. My design was accepted in 2014 and a contract was signed in 2016 with Design Corps 4S, who are my Iranian associate architects, and the building commenced construction in 2017. Regrettably, after the US withdrew from the Iran deal and economic sanctions were reinstituted, construction funding dried up and the project was halted. Thus, it lies waiting for completion, and I continue providing pro bono design refinements even today. The spiritual riddle placed before me as an architect was, how do you design a meaningful mausoleum in the 21st century for Shams, this transcendent, culturally significant, and highly controversial mystical figure who signed his presentations parande, a Persian word about a wandering bird, that is, a seeker who travels from place to place, looking around to see if there are any other seekers who have the same attribute of being sought. In Rumi, Shams found such a seeker. The 7 concept design donations we made to the Shams Foundation in December 12. I want to say that the Times of Tehran on December 31st in 2014, the headline read, "Architectural Design for Mausoleum of Shams-i-Tabrizi Unveiled." Tehran, the architectural design for the Mausoleum of Shams was unveiled during a ceremony yesterday in Khoy, which is home to the mausoleum of the tutor of the Persian poet Jalaluddin Rumi. The design was created by the acclaimed Iranian architect Nader Ardalan, a little self-serving, you'll forgive, who was a senior research associate at that time at Harvard University. Several literati and officials, including manager director of the Shams and Rumi Foundation, Hujjatullah Ayyubi, and the director of the Academy of Persian Language and Literature, Ghulam Ali Haddad Adel, attended the ceremony. The scholar and literati Muhammad Ali Mubahed, 91, who has done much research on Shams, was also honored at the ceremony. Well, the research that I had to turn on in order to be able to tackle this work. My answer was to fall back onto the principal themes that I have explored over the last 5 decades, which are the morphology of Persian philosophic and architectural concepts. These have been expanded over the years to explore how an international, collaborative, multidisciplinary, architectural, historical, and philosophic inspection of the tangible realms of selected world cultures and built environments may identify core, recurring, transcendent design concepts. We continue actually on this with a 4-group of research team at ACS. In this search, I have been aided by the Pythagorean perception of the quantitative, Zahir, and the qualitative, Batin, understanding of mathematics, numbers, and geometry. This design approach gives symbolic meaning to me for their appropriate tangible and intangible transcendent use. In particular, and relevant to our discussions today, I have been deeply interested in the ancient symbolic and spiritual quest of squaring the circle. Carl Jung held that symbols as archetypes are actually forms of psychic energy that have to be clothed in forms for us to see and understand them in our conscious mind. Within this view, the square form has traditionally represented the symbol of the manifest material world, while the circle has symbolized the spiritual transcendent world. With this quest in mind, I was pleased to find one day in Scientific American magazine the findings of the Danish mathematician and inventor Piet Hein, who had recently asked himself a similar fascinating question that I paraphrase. He asked, "What is the simplest and most pleasing closed curve that mediates fairly between the square and the circle?" His answer was x to the 2.5 power plus y to the 2.5 power equals unity, or 1. For this new discovered shape, he coined the term supercircle. I was fascinated not necessarily by the name, but by his equation and the visual solution to this spiritual koan. and determined to use it as appropriately suitable for the design of a place of cultural and spiritual gathering. Such a place was the Shams-i-Tabrizi Mausoleum for me. So the design response. I explore a design response based upon my research, my own inner ongoing contemplative dialogue with Rumi and Shams that I have termed Khalq Jadid. This is a concept of a new creation built on perennial values. It has been complemented by my outer discussions with the Shams and the Shams-i-Tabrizi Foundation, with locals in the city of Khoy, and some of the cultural adepts of Iranian culture to glimpse an understanding of the core worldviews of Rumi and Shams, based upon a manifest hidden Zahir Batin concept of reality that is found in the Quran. I interpreted the Griven spatial program prepared by the Foundation for the design of this mausoleum based on 4 themes. One, the historic, to commemorate the historic figures of Shams and Rumi, their unique relationship, the literary, philosophic, and spiritual significance of their message, complemented by their lasting world cultural impact. 2, social educational engagement, to conceive a place of culture and illumination for people of all ages and walks of life in a paradise garden setting, but avoiding the museumification of the site, recognizing that even a tourist is half a pilgrim and a pilgrim is half a tourist. The foundation suggested the Hafez Garden Mausoleum in Shiraz, which I knew, as a model for the design. Third, the environmental and architectural. Adaptation to its natural context and the precedents of mausolea built in Iran through a research that I performed, but specifically I found the 10th century Samanid mausoleum in Bukhara, based on the sacred essence of the Sasanian Chartaq, with special reference to the cenotaph design of Shams, whose body has never mysteriously been found. And 4, what is the spiritual atmosphere for this place? I chose a poetic, sublime design theme, in the garden of reunion with the beloved, to seek recognition of the genius loci of the place, to generate a contemporary transcendent architectural experience based on a transformative new geometry, interpretations on Quranic verses on Joseph's well for Shams's design of his cenotaph, using the concept of shunyata and the abyss. The mysterious character of the mirror used both as a solar tracking mirror and in traditional mirror tile work handicraft, as inspired by my friend, the late artist Munir Farmanfarmayan, to be built with local natural materials and building systems and culturally relevant calligraphic signs to give a holistic visual message of intuitive spiritual love. These are some of the wonderful friends I found on this journey. People from the Ministry of Cultural Heritage, Handicraft, and Tourism. On top, people of the municipality of Khoy, Iran. On the left is my associate in this work, Sam Tehranchi. Below are Sam's office. He gathers a lot of pretty ladies around him for this design, naturally, since it's based on love. And of course, the Rumi and Shams Foundation. The building that has specific significance, Tomb of Ismail Samani, 10th century Bukhara in Greater Khorasan, Persia. The project description is that we're dealing with a memorial garden set within a large site, about 7,500 meters, situated in a residential neighborhood in the old city of Khoy, which has moderate climate in northwest Iran. A small section of the site has historically served as a cemetery, where a symbolic tombstone of Shams presently lies, marked by an existing 16th century Seljuk brick minaret that will be preserved. There's some discussion as to whether this is a 14th century. In close urban proximity lies the revered Bohlul Shrine to the south of the site, and a living ritual pilgrimage path I was happy to find connects the Bohlul Shrine to the Shams burial place. Due to the very traditional Islamic cultural context, the proposed design recognizes the direction of daily prayer toward Mecca. So the site, which is 15.89 degrees west from south toward Mecca, this consideration inspired the rotation of the total project towards a symbolic sacred orientation, thus providing a subliminal unconscious awareness of the spiritual sense to pervade the entire design. The garden offers places of repose, landscape terraces of fragrant flower beds, cooling shade under the grove of fruit trees. Nearby tea room has been designed. With columns of tall sarv, the classic cypress trees, naturally irrigated by water channels with their flowing sound of water that empty into a mirror pool placed in front of the mausoleum sanctuary. Rising out and above an embracing green roofscape of undulating vaults, the vertical form of the mausoleum holds the pivot of the entire design. Conceived as a symbolic super-circle ellipsoid that I'll explain, which is clad in patterned handmade buff brick, this apex holds a computer-based solar tracking mirror that beams a ray of sunlight down upon the memorial polished basalt cenotaph of Shams in the sanctuary below. Surrounding the main sanctuary are exhibition rooms displaying the Sufi poetry of Shams and Rumi, a research library, study spaces, a lecture hall, visiting scholar accommodations, administration, and support facilities. The design is driven by consideration for human scale, simplicity, and an economy of means by using traditional sustainable materials and utilizing natural climatic adaptation measures to achieve an efficient and healthy radiant heating and cooling system, operating with maximum natural ventilation and producing low carbon emissions, and providing human comfort for seating or for performing a prayer directly on the honed black asphalt paving, which are locally sourced. So now I'm going to actually go into this short PowerPoint presentation with just music.
Thank you, Nader. That was very powerful. The combination of images and music was really evocative. So thank you very much. I now want to introduce our panelists and also encourage everyone in the audience to ask any questions in the Q&A feature here in Zoom. But our panelists include Mariam Eskandari, who is the founder of Meme in Designs in Pasadena, California, a multidisciplinary design studio with projects that range in scale from architecture and urban design to furniture, fabric, products, and graphics, using creative and innovative ways to be agents of change to shape the built environment. Mariam has taught at Harvard, as well as the Boston Architectural College and California State Polytechnic University in Pomona. Our next panelist is Tammy Gaber, who's the director and an associate professor at the School of Architecture at Laurentian University in Ontario, Canada, where she teaches architectural design and theory courses. Her forthcoming book is Beyond the Divide, A Century of Canadian Mosque Design. And she has published a chapter in the forthcoming book, Global Encyclopedia of Women in Architecture, as well as 2 chapters in the forthcoming book, The Religious Architecture of Islam. Our third panelist is Bruce Lawrence, who is the Nancy and Jeffrey Marcus Humanities Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Religion at Duke University. He has published widely, including the book, The Quran in English, a biography, and articles such as The Study Quran, a new translation and commentary, and Muslim Modernities, Interdisciplinary Insights Across Time and Space, both published in the journal The Muslim World. And our fourth panelist is Gary J. Coates, who is a professor of architecture at Kansas State University and is a distinguished professor of the Association of Collegiate Schools of Architecture, a leading voice in the movement to create sustainable buildings, cities, and bioregions based on climatically adapted and culturally situated architectures of place. He has numerous publications and 6 books to his name, including Resettling America, Energy, Ecology, Community, Eric Asmussen, Architect, and the Architecture of Carl Nerian. So welcome to all of our panelists. And I would encourage anybody who wants to start to make some comments or ask questions of Nader. Feel free to unmute yourself, and looking forward to your thoughts.
Well, this is Bruce Lawrence. Let me just begin by saying that I feel this is an extraordinary moment of both privilege and insight to be sharing this forum and to have seen these pictures and heard the music and now heard Nader's words of commentary on the project. And I feel as if Shams' poem, the poetry that Rumi wrote about Shams applies to us, that Kham Budam Pukhte Shudam Sokhtam, that we were raw before we heard this, we're now still cooking and we've yet to be burnt. So I feel as if this process is described not only the project, but us who are listening and looking at it. And I think what really most attracts me is that there's so much that has gone into the construction of this model. And what we see in it is these pictures and this commentary that Nader has provided. But the inner light, what he described to me one time in exchange we had by email, where he said, the mirror shines brightest when its light is directed inward. I feel that the inward directed light of this project is still looking for its final glow. And I don't know what that will be, but I feel as if we've come further. And I can only hope that in this lifetime, those of us who have admired Rumi and longed to see Shams as the echo that is more than just a distant fading music, but something that has allowed constant evocation of the friend that he was for Rumi, I can dare to hope that we will see in our lifetime the fruition of this project that Nader's worked on so long and so faithfully. So I feel again that there's so much more I could say, but I just am happy that we are in the Pukhte Shudam phase, and I hope we get to be Sukhtam at the end.
Thank you, Bruce. Nader, do you have any? Oh, go ahead, Gary. Go ahead.
I can say that I have read with joy and delight Rumi as a poet for at least 50 years. One of my leading inspirations in my explorations of sacred geometry and sacred architecture has been Nader Ardalan. And through his book, The Sense of Unity, I consider Nader to be a dear friend and also an inspiration who is himself inspired. And my overall impression of the presentation, and I'll say maybe more about particulars later, but I can say that it felt like an act of love in the spirit of Shams and Rumi, that it has been designed from the heart outward, and that the result is an extraordinarily powerful and beautiful and sublime expression of the spiritual art of love as embodied in Shams and Rumi. So I feel honored to be part of this panel, to try to give something back to my mentor and teacher and friend, Nader Ardalan. But as always, my debt to him only grows greater than I can ever repay. So anyway, it's good to be here.
Thank you, Gary. Tammy or Miriam?
Sure. I echo many of these sentiments, and I too have enjoyed reading Rumi, maybe not for as long, Gary, but for a long while. And I particularly have enjoyed listening, and I've been very lucky to have known Nader for a number of years and listened to him share with us some of the processes for the design of this. And today's presentation was certainly enlightening. I mean, I particularly enjoyed the very careful unpacking of the design process and how you connected these really esoteric concepts to design ideas, how you make the immaterial material, right? It's the question, right? It's the question. How do you describe or curate the immaterial with the material, right? It's almost contradictory. And so this, I think, is one of the greatest challenges that I think has been expressed so evocatively in today's presentation. I really did appreciate that. I did have a question for you though, Nader, and I'm just curious, and I may be coming out of left field here, but in many memoriam buildings, like a building in memory of someone who's a saint or someone who's wonderful or great, there's often a seed to the design of such a project, right? It could be a relic, it could be words. Would you consider that there has been a seed for this project?
Time to begin our dialogue, no? Wonderful question. And I really do want to first express my appreciation for the kindness Bruce and Gary have expressed. And certainly I hope it leads to more discussions about those domains. That's a tricky question, dear Tammy. I think that the seed to this is the spiritual quest. And I have no idea how this began, but when I returned to Iran in 1964, after 18 years of having been raised and educated and worked in America and not being back to Iran, and being really distant from what the culture of Iran was like, I want to say that I found returning to Iran that I was completely baffled, because I had had a very Anglo-Saxon exoteric education in architecture. They have been great guides to me, and our gods in those days were Mies van der Rohe and Corbusier, and then of course as we matured, for me, it became Louis Kahn. So if you ask me for a seed, I think the seed for me in my prior education was Lucan, because Lucan was a spiritual man. Now, Lucan I invited to Iran for the International Congress of Architects in 1970. He read a poem, he read a Rumi poem, and that's when we connected. And he was kind enough then to accept to write the introduction to my and Lale's book, The Sense of Unity, to University of Chicago. So really it started then. And I've been trying to figure out how, as an architect, one can deal with what works he so brilliantly accomplished in his work, and I, so inadept. But I've been working at this now for 50 years. And it's still, as you see, incomplete and still in dreams. I think the other seed, dear, is your circling the square. As an architect, we really deal with geometry. And so I think geometry is the key to this seed.
Great. Good. Thank you, Nader. Miriam, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Nader for this beautiful presentation. I mean, we all kind of grew up, maybe I take this for granted, we all grew up knowing Rumi and knowing Shams. And to see this whole project come together and to understand it and to see, you know, all the plans and sections, you know, it's just, it's both beautiful and sublime in its own way. But the comment that I actually wanted to make was basically like when watching this, what came to my mind was that, you know, today the practice of architecture is often polarized between technology and, you know, a compensatory like facade of a culture, which itself is, you know, a specific expression of means and ends, especially in the realm of materiality and tectonic. And I think architecture, the way that Nader is presenting it here, can only be sustained today if it can distance itself equally from reactionary, unrealistic impulses of the architectonic forms and the past. And I think when Nader, when you were talking about how, you know, being raised here and then going back, it's almost like, you know, the whole idea of what architecture, you know, should be. It's almost that, you know, it has to remove itself from both the optimization of tendencies to regress in a nostalgic historicism, while at the same time having this ability to cultivate an identity and give into a culture. And I think watching this presentation, you know, you've done that so beautifully. So, I mean, and it was very enjoyable. So that was my just comment for now.
Nader, what are your thoughts about that? And you might speak up a little bit. You were a little quiet in your last response, or lean in a bit.
Are you speaking to me?
Yes, Nader, I am. Yes, I am. Sorry. Yes, I wondered what your thoughts were, and encourage you to maybe turn your volume up just a little bit.
Thanks so much. I turned the volume down a little bit when the double duduk music came on, which is the way it's supposed to be professionally played. Tom, I have to admit, I'm humbled by doing any of these works, because I truly believe that I'm not able to handle all of these things appropriately. And so I'm happy that so many of the people on the panel have so far spoken positively about what they saw. And what strikes me more than that, than the positive, is that it struck a chord in them. It is that chord. Louis Kahn used to talk about a golden string, you know, just the golden string. In fact, he used to say, traditions are as golden dust falling in the air. And if you have had the opportunity to grasp some of that, you have the possibility of anticipating the future. This golden dust that today is not very much appreciated, because this golden dust doesn't buy you good stocks and bonds. This golden dust is so intangible, and yet it's the most tangible. And I feel that I'm very encouraged by one thing. While most of the world has become highly concretized and materialized, monetized, there are these wonderful pockets in America and in Iran, and I'm sure in every other part of the world that I go and I seek and I speak and I meet or I build. It's this sort of 1% of people who appreciate this golden dust. And here in America, there's a wonderful growing group of people that deal with the spiritual and architecture. And so friends are discovering these things and writing about them. And I'm really thrilled to be a part of that. So when the speaker session was supported by Duke and by New York University, and of course sponsored in part by our own ACS group, I'm very happy that this is happening, and that this session is only the fourth of 4 such sessions that have been held on this wonderful webinar. And I feel that these things, since they're being recorded and that they have the opportunity to be displayed later and thought about later, I think that the group who are handling this, and I'm being one of them, but this is a very important domain in today's world that you are supporting. And I think it brings a very refreshing message. Yes, that in the material, there is the unmeasurable.
Nader, I would like to follow up on Mariam's point. I'm quite interested in how the population of Khoy or the people of Iran have received your design and what they think about the mausoleum, because of course the Muslim world is a very diverse world, and there are some who may not, who think that Rumi and Shams are, you know, maybe a little bit irreligious. So what has the conversation been in Iran about your design, and has there been discussion about those issues between, say, a more nostalgic view of Islam and a more progressive view of Islam, for example?
Tom, you touch on a most important thing.
And if you could speak up a little bit, Nader, or turn your volume up, that would be great. Yeah. I'm
also being told by my wife that I should speak up.
Okay. Yeah. Well, listen to her.
Let me go back a little bit in history. In early Islam, there were really more or less 2 interpretations of how you dealt with what was really the message, which is the Quran. Okay, the root of the Islamic faith. And this is not a religious discussion, it's a historic discussion now. So we had one group that were more or less called the Asharite school, whose thoughts base were well developed and written about by the theologian Al-Ghazali in the 12th century. This was a rational base of looking at the Quran. The Quran's words were there. You followed what more is admonitions, because the Qurans are really the Quran is a series of instructions of how to follow the faith, how to reach truth. Okay, you just follow this, and so I would say this was the orthodox view, the rational interpretation of the Quran. Around the 9th century, but then literary and philosophically, 13th century, Ibn Arabi, the great theologian, philosopher, Andalusian, wrote another way. And this other way of looking at the Quran is to look at it as a metaphysical interpretation of the words. And that this was based on the fact that the world that we know, has no permanency. It's an impermanent place. The only permanent is God. And so if you're dealing with impermanent aspect of existence, what is this rational way of looking at things? How could that be the only way? And so this creative imagination, which Henri Corbin writes about, these are the things that we've also inherited. So we have on one hand, the rational. On the other hand, you have the metaphysical. And some very brilliant associations of putting these two together have also been written. So Hrawardi deals with this aspect. I want to say that since the world today is so dominated by material determinism, naturally the rational deterministic holds such sway and looks at Rumi as though he was a very nice love poet, but can that buy me a Mercedes Benz? No. So I want to say that this is one thing. The aspect of irreligion in the work of Rumi is highly false, absurd attitude. Everything that Rumi says is based on the Quran. Everything that he writes about is Rumi was a highly respected theologian until he was 40 years old. Okay, and then one day in a bazaar, this parande, this bird called Shams-i-Tabrizi, comes along and grabs his attention for 2 years, grabs his attention to such a point that Rumi, through these conversations and introspections, understands this second interpretation of the Quran, the metaphysical interpretation. And to be honest with you, why this word ishq or love is not love for man and another man. It's love for the divine, for the absolute. And I can't say this any better than the poetry of the Masnavi that these people have written. So there are people, and then you ask me about how people in Iran. Well, the Rumi Shams Foundation were the people who loved it and who supported the idea back in 2012 and have so far. But they then became even members of the Ministry of Culture. So they became actually a client, officially writing contracts. And then as the situation politically happens, that particular more, let's say, reformed way of looking at things were not voted in. So a much more conservative group has now come in. And generally speaking, that conservative group, but then I have to say something to you. In history, Imam Khomeini wrote metaphysical poetry. And yet, today, that aspect is not so much appreciated. The more dogmatic orthodox is more appreciated. So I think that the whims of time about when this building will ever get completed deals with who's in power at one point in time. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Tom, if I could just
Yes,
jump in.
go ahead, Miriam.
Because your question also made me reflect on a couple of, and Nader, you can please correct me if I'm wrong, in a couple of the designs, because I mean, Nader, your design is so complex in terms of architecture, and at the same time, it's so simple, and that is actually the how both Shams and Rumi are defined, and that's how they also relate themselves to the divine as well. And I see when looking at these plans and these sections, it's your design is so rooted in the human scale and the golden mean proportions that the meanings stem directly from a revealed connection between the rationality of a normative technique, and that really comes through. And the intent of these expressions is, of course, perhaps they could be secularized in the sacred, in sacred forms by precluding to the usual set of sensation of religious references, just the way that the poetry is done, and then reconnecting on the whole space in a spiritual, mystical way through the design of the chartag, a place of worship, of the sacred fire. And then, of course, all of these in through your design, when you were sharing them with us, are these cross-cultural references, whether it's the cenotaph, the chartag, the lacing of the Samanid architecture versus the Seljuk history. These all give way to a great profanity through the views of mystical esotericism. And at the end, I feel like when you were talking about the lightness and the total mobility of the spirit, and I use the spirit as a capital S, in a form that basically, this form that you've created has no beginning or an end and defines life and death. And I think that's what this language, this vocabulary that you have basically created, gives no room for any sort of question to a culture or a country to define either or. Am I correct?
I love what you say. I'm sorry that some of the earlier conversation has already taken us to 4 o'clock, but I'd love to hear from Tammy, from Gary, and from Bruce some more insight of what they had seen. Criticism.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to jump in. I actually took a peek in the Q&A and I noticed somebody brought up a question that I was going to ask, Nushan Ismaili. And she says, what an amazing presentation. Thank you for sharing this with us. I have a question about the ritual path to the mausoleum. Would you please elaborate more on this? And I was thinking the exact same thing. I just really liked her phrasing. But this idea of preparing the mind and the body and the soul before you enter the place, right? That's what architecture does. It curates, but architecture curates that not just in the building, but in the landscape design. So if you wanted to maybe speak to us a little bit about that.
Well, I really wanted a Paradise Garden motif, but I've done so many paradise motifs built on the square, and so I thought, first of all, I wanted to go from ground to a higher level, and so following Rumi's admonition, if you're really interested, get out of the room, go on top of the roof. I wanted to build something that I could go onto the roof. So I had to do a design that went from 0 to plus 11 meters. So this aspect created terracing. I also wanted very much to, by the way, this duduk, this music, I know I really would have thought that I should have used the ney, the Turkish ney, but I found it too shrill. And I found this one more somber, more profound, more mysterious, more sad. Yeah, and this duduk is made from apricot trees. That's why it has this softness. I wanted those trees in that orchard to be apricot trees, and to have a fruit, to be involved. You could pick fruit and eat fruit. My dad, when I was about the 6 years old or before we came to America, he grew an apricot tree. And he picked, in fact, he had also I guess a peach tree. He picked the fruit, gave it to me. I ate the fruit. And then he said, Nader, I want you to now put this into the soil and let it grow. And by God, after time, I saw a budding and I saw a tree grow. I think I want an experience in this garden where those things happen. And the seed that you ask about, Tammy, is this seed that you place in the soil. Is to, you know, in the pictures where I show that basalt black cenotaph, and you know, and then next to it is, I would say, a man who respects the religious aspects because of these people, and so he's praying that way. Next to that was a picture of a student, of a woman student, carrying a big bag on her back. It's to place the seed into that student, the young people of Iran, that really today are brilliant young people. When I go and lecture there, they're thrilled to learn new things. They're thrilled that someone would speak to them about spirituality. Yeah, but the pack they're carrying, this baggage that they're carrying, is all these mixed signs of wrong path, right path, wrong path, right. They don't know. And so today in this world, I think it's very important that some people like Khan gives you this right path attitude. And in time, we look at Khan as one of the great architects of the 20th century. And maybe in time, he would be compared to other great architects of the world that have existed. We need that kind of commitment. And so, dear, I want to say this was the seed. This was the seed.
Nader, I think the question was also about that urban design scheme that you showed, where you're moving from the traditional, there's a building a few blocks away, and then there's a path to your site. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit more about that experience?
Yes, dear. Thank you, Tom. Tom, things happen because you think that they happen by accident.
Huh?
When I was taken to this site first, the car really only reached this one sort of larger Maidan square. Mm-hmm. And I got out with my assistant, and it was at this shrine of Bohlul, who's just a minor saintly person, but you saw people were there, they bury their beloveds there, and then they go pray there. And so I first got introduced to that shrine, and I saw, my goodness, just the common people, the everyday people of the neighborhood came to this place with a belief that was beautiful and earnest. And then we walked up this path, and there was the site of Shams. So I said, for Christ's sake, that's exactly what I have to do. I have to connect these two, because this is an existing, existing spiritual place, ritual, journey, and I have no right to disturb that. You may also have noticed one thing. The original design I sent was big triangles. Yeah, big triangles. Nobody asked, well, what about that triangle? What you built wasn't a triangle. No, it is a part of the triangle, because they told me, I said, well, people will come here by automobile. Where would they park? And they said, oh, we don't know, park. I said, well, you have to buy land. So on the other side of the road to the north, they said, we'll buy this big land and we'll have a parking there. So I designed this thing to go from one side over the road to the other. Then when the buying of the top land never occurred, so you got left with a truncated triangle, which is okay, I mean, because that's the meat of what I was really interested in. Getting to the parking was, function, but the main route is there. Sorry, diversion. Go ahead.
No, that's great. Gary or Bruce, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to jump in and say that one of the things which we have not talked about Nader, which you and I talked about in some of our wonderful exchanges, is the fact that this is not only a delicate dalliance of opposites, of dyads that go back and forth between sun and moon, and between the fana and the baqa, between dissolution and permanence, but also between ignorance and knowledge, and between life and death. All these seeming opposites, which come to a new life and a new expression in the design you made, also have an echo in Chinese thought. And I just thought it's worth saying, since a lot of us are thinking about global events these days that involve China, that one of the gifts that you have brought through this, and I think, again, it comes to somebody whom you and I have discussed and others may not know, Toshiko Izutsu, that there is within Chinese thought this notion of shunyata or the abyss, and that really one of the things you're searching for is a new light, a new, if you will, a new stream of golden dust. In fact, when I heard you talk about golden dust, I said, this should be on local TV, because we should know that golden dust is the counterpart to Bitcoin. It's the answer to Bitcoin. It will outlast all the Bitcoin profits of this world, that you will create this golden dust for Shams-i-Tabrizi. And so I think part of it also goes to China. And I just wonder if you could talk about that aspect of your inspiration.
Did we set this up, Bruce? Because this leads me immediately to a famous story, the legend between the Chinese and the Persians. Now, this legend has also been told in other nationalities, but because you said China and Persia, this story is the one that I learned. The greatest artists from China and from Persia were brought together in a competition. Who could paint the most beautiful painting? The corollary architectural story is who could build the most beautiful architecture. And so they said, all right, each of you be on this side. There'll be a curtain drawn between you. And on this side, the Chinese began their work. On this side, the Persians began their work, and none could see the other. Finally, when time was up, they asked the Persians to show what they had done. And you could imagine color galore, hafrang, tiles, all the unbelievable manifestations of God in that building. Yeah. And they said, now let's see what the Chinese have done. So they drew the curtain. And what had they done? What had the Chinese had done? They had built a beautiful, polished mirror. Their contribution was a mirror to mirror the beauty of the Persian. But of course, the mirror is an illusion. That was the story. What about that?
Thank you.
Gary, what do you say? Come on.
That's fabulous. I'm struck, and others have alluded to it as well, and I would reinforce those comments and perceptions that what strikes me about the design is its extraordinary capacity to embody both metaphorically and symbolically and experientially a union of complementary opposites. And not only opposites in the formal sense, certainly they're there. One can look at your parabolic dome and couldn't be reminded of a minaret as a vertical axis mundi form. You can look at of course, the square and the circle that you started with, but you're also creating a union of, as others have rightly observed, past and present and future, because we see the intentions and the principial truths of traditional society, but clothed in new forms, as if a new seed has been planted in you, and through you, a new kind of formal expression of timeless truth. So a unity of the timely, it is of our time with the solar beam reflected down with the ecological approach to the garden and the union of nature and culture. But I see at a formal level, there's to me so much resonance. Like I was thinking of some of the Hindu temples when I looked at the dome, called a dome. And I'm thinking of the Dome of the Rock with your cenotaph. So, there is a multicultural, transcultural, really, echo and resonance pattern that the forms for me give rise to association. So it becomes, it moves Islam into the theater through Shams and Rumi and your love for him through your work into a kind of global spirituality. We're all intercommunicative now in this great, crazy, wild, beautiful, and violent world that we're in. And we do need a kind of spirituality that transcends all tribalisms and all localisms. So I felt the universality of what you're doing. I think you have been a vehicle for inspired understanding and action in all of these ways. I could say a lot more, but I just wanted to, maybe all I'm doing is speaking in praise. And if we got into it, we'd say, well, maybe it could be better here. That's not the point, because it's always the overall feeling quality, the overall truth and beauty and goodness of what you do. And that's what still radiates through the design to me. Modernity and tradition. What's the conflict here? It's Islam and other religions. What's the conflict here? And I think Rumi and Shams would say, that's right. All mystics speak of the same God.
Gary, just to follow up on what you said, I think that one of the things that's most universal and most also daring and creative about what is in this design is what some people call the Anthropocene age, a planetary sense that we are really not only connecting to other parts of the world and other cultures, but we're connecting to the planet at a new level because the environment requires it. And this book speaks to apricot trees, as we now found out, but also speaks to animals and birds. And I think actually that's this dalliance and delight in nature, which has to be something that Nader's brought out in his art, between not only connecting matter and spirit, but making sure that nature is the grounding point for all of them is really magnificent.
Right. Joining earth and human and the transcendent divine. And it updates the Paradise Garden tradition, makes that tradition, which one could say grows out of a certain historical, religious, spiritual tradition, certain parts of the world and all the rest, but it makes it again universal and contemporary. So I think I echo all I'm saying is I echo what you're observing. That it is the Paradise Garden, but it doesn't have to be the historical form in which it arose to be a contemporary global Paradise Garden vision. The earth is the Paradise Garden we were given. And so I think all of that's in this. And I just have a feeling Shams and Rumi would be very happy with this proposal.
That's great. We have a question from one of the audience members that really, in a way, is a question to all of us, since everybody here is either a current or a former educator. And I'll read a part of the question. It goes, this is addressed to you, Nader, but really to all of us. You continue to push the boundaries of creative design and spirituality, teaching us lessons on how to lead our lives holistically. You have brought love and science into architecture. And then here comes the question. What is your advice to the next generation of architects who may not have been exposed to tradition, poetry, and spirituality, since it is still not taught in schools? So, Nader, what are your thoughts, or really any of the panelists, about this? How do we convey some of these ideas in, say, architectural education or in higher education more broadly?
I'll take a quick cut at, and then there's more adepts here who will answer that. It's about time that we understood that art is involved with poetry. Architecture, we've read, is the poetic coming together of materials in light. We've heard these things, but actually we got to believe it. It has to move you that way. So I don't understand why in our education of architects, we do not involve more poetry about the creative process. Some do, some have you read. So I think we're touching on the void in our education. We've become too materialistic. You've got to learn, how the building stands up and how particularly you can do it for the least expense. And so, okay, well, that's good. That's also very important. But then complement it with the intangible aspect. And because the intangible is unmeasurable, if you can't measure it, the deterministic, positivistic, rational point of view says, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. Well, this is utter nonsense. Do you mean that because you cannot measure God, that God doesn't exist? Is that your proof of the death of God? It cannot be. It's too shallow. Too shallow. Give us a profound answer to that question. I don't know if God exists. Certainly, I only know that I sense that there's an order in the universe. And of course, this is a paraphrase from a wonderful American writer and philosopher. He says, but it behooves us to be in harmony with that order. It's just good for you to be in harmony with nature. Mm-hmm. So my answer to you is, the more we can create an understanding of the value of the unmeasurable to balance the overburdening of the measurable, the possible chance there exists that you'll come out with a balance in things. Please, others, Tammy, you're doing this every day. What's your answer?
Oh, that's such a good question. Your answer was so good. I to kind of go back to some of the words used in the question, to really think about the role of writing and text. And like you said, Nader, poetry, and in architecture education, that's often, like today, not considered enough. And I think that it is absolutely fundamental that students learn and creatives learn to express themselves in more than one media at once. And simultaneously, I find it to be an incredible process to, express, a concept or an idea, whatever you've got, right? And to kind of work with it and learn how to articulate what you're saying, what you're thinking through words, through sketch, through image, through music, through all of your senses, but to also start to perceive. And it actually, if you don't mind, this question brought up another question that I had, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
And it's related to the idea of words, right? And so, we have Rumi, especially in Shams. They are celebrated for magical expression in words, right? And in a lot of sacred Islamic spaces, the word is celebrated in epigraphy or really large calligraphy, carved or painted or mosaic, right, on the exterior or the interior. And that these words, certain words, serve as cues, right? You go in and you see a word and it's not always religious text, right? And I'm curious, and I'm sorry if I'm coming out of left field, I'm curious, Nader, if you at all employed the use of the word embedded in the building at all?
Well, this work, dearest Tammy, is incomplete.
Yeah.
Maybe that is my koan in my entire life to the end of my days. So we're still working on improving this design. The cenotaph has been created in the last month.
Wow. Okay.
In the last month. Okay. So in my admonition to myself at the beginning that I read for you was that we hope to have the calligraphic message. We haven't gotten to the calligraphic yet, but yes, definitely. That's a wonderful work. By the way, a point of clarification. I had met Monir Farmayan, the very, very gifted Iranian artist, sculptor. I found to my delight that her work in mirror came from a page from my book, The Sense of Unity. On her wall, she had, I don't know, page whatever it is, that are the geometric shapes that I had. This. On her wall was this. Can you see this?
A little bit, yeah. That's better.
Yeah.
And she started and built every one of these shapes in three-dimensional mirror that were then exhibited in the Guggenheim Museum to great applause. And so when I then came to know her better, I said to her, I'm so happy that you're doing this. I wanted very much to have her do the interior of the super ellipsoid trapezoidals. But then she passed away. So the only person who remembers that, who introduced me, is Faryar, a wonderful Iranian architect, Harvard graduate. So I used one of her designs that I love very much, and I wanted to build that in mirror and mud. That pattern you can build in mirror and mud. I want to say to you that handicraft is what I hope to resuscitate in our Iranian architecture. The handicraft, the brickwork. Why did I not do something else? One of the other presenters for this wonderful work in Chile, he did also a domical form, but he did it in, I don't know what he did it in, what material. I wanted to build in actually mud. I wanted to build in traditional material, like Hassan Fatih, our dearest mentor. He's another Louis Kahn, of course. Mm-hmm. I think that this act of the hand in architecture and materials both brings us to the earth and to the human being. And I wish some people look at this work that I'm showing and say, oh, but God, it's just all traditional. You copied this thing. Well, yes, I was inspired by it, but it's to use our hands and our handicraft. And you know, the ministry is called the Ministry of Heritage, Handicraft, and Tourism. This is who should be supporting this project.
Nader, speaking of shapes, we have a question from the audience. The person asking us says that your dome reminds me of the Sufi whirling dervish's cap that is tall and in the same shape, and wondering if there is any connection there as well. So was there any reference in your mind to the whirling dervish cap?
I use every possible imagery that I could capture, but I have to own up to this. I first investigated some of these shapes for a person that Bruce and I knew and loved. Pir Velayat Khan was a Sufi. His son, who's inherited that lineage, is a Sufi. Yes, there is visual connections. You know, we work with visual connect. These are cute. What Tammy says as triggers. These are triggers. Now, in this building, they don't want people to come and perform the Sufi whirling downward. They worry that people will come and make this, you know. So I haven't said anything about that. It's not to be performed there as far as I know. But Sufism, this aspect of an interpretation of life metaphysically, is a very important aspect to complement the material interpretation of life, or else we'd be lost. And why is it so timely? global warming, climate change. We've been dealing with and abusing this because, you see, we've been using the earth as a throwaway resource. Okay, you cut this tree, you use it, throw it away. You just throw it away, and no, you can't do that anymore. You've got to get serious about the fact that today we must be advocates, we must be stewards of nature. And I think that all of these terrible things that we're going through are lessons to us. Wake up, wake up. You're interpreting life too stupidly, too simply. Life is much more beautiful, blossoming with different opportunities of interpretation to our creative imagination. So I think it's very timely. These things are timely. They're tied to the sun. Important. By the way, I could use anything from the Bible or from Buddhism, but let me stay with Muslim societies. The Quran says, "We will show you the signs upon the horizon and within yourself until you know that it is the truth." You saw the diagrams that I showed you about this inward and this outward. I think that these are complementary aspects. If you don't understand the beauty of life inwardly, you'll never be able to realize the beauty of life outwardly.
Wow. Well, those are great closing words for us, Nader. We are unfortunately out of time. So I wanted again to thank you for the wonderful presentation, to thank our panelists, Tammy, Mariam, Gary, and Bruce, and to thank everybody who is here with us and those who will be listening to the recording of this. I also just want to mention that this is the final event of this year's four-part on the spiritual in contemporary architecture series. And as such, I once again wanted to thank the four sponsors of the series: the Keenan Institute for Ethics at Duke University, the Institute for Public Knowledge at New York University, and the Center on Modernity and Transition, together with the Architecture, Culture, and Spirituality Forum. I also wanted to thank my colleague, Michael Crosby, who moderated most of these sessions, and also wanted everyone to stay tuned for news of more events next academic year on the theme of the spiritual in contemporary architecture. And with that, I thank you all for a wonderful event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Tom.